Hey friends, it's your pal John here from Sonic Drive Studio. Thank you so much for tuning into the channel. Today what I'd like to do is talk to you about Helix by Line 6 again, because it's one of my all-time favorite guitar platforms, and it has really improved not only the quality of my music, but also the workflow. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And as you probably already know, I like to use own-hammer impulse responses a lot in conjunction with Helix, so we're going to talk about that a little bit too. So Helix by Line 6 is a very powerful platform. There are a bunch of different versions. The floorboards, the rack units, and now also the HX Stomp Helix, which is very cool. It's a very small version. But in this video, I'm using the Helix native platform, which is basically the VST plugin version that you can load into your DAW. It does all the same things tonally as the other versions. The only thing that does not have amp modeling, though, is the HX effects pedal, which I have here on my desk. But with all the other versions of Helix, you will be able to reproduce the tones that I'm getting in this video. First, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about why I think Helix is so amazing. Number one, it just sounds great. It sounds amazing. I really love how it sounds inside my mixes and when I'm playing. It responds like a real amp. It sounds like a real amp and it fits in the mix very well. So the overall frequency balance is just really good. It just sounds very natural and pleasant to the ear. I have a bunch of real amps in this room, and I have compared Helix to those amps, and I must say that Helix really sounds very convincing. So it sounds very much like a real amp. So yeah, it sounds very balanced and it sounds very pleasant. So what the own-hammer impulse responses do is they take that to the next level. So they make Helix sound even more realistic, even more pleasant to the ear, and even more balanced. And you'll get to hear how that sounds in a couple of minutes. Please note that for this video, I'm using own-hammer IRs from the Line 6 marketplace that you can find on the Line 6 website. And those own-hammer files are called the Line 6 player packs. Number two, ease of use. Helix is so easy to use, not only because of the user interface, but also because of all the controls and how everything is laid out. It's just very straightforward and easy. This helps get you great results within seconds. So that's why I like it. I don't like to tweak for hours. Just like to add a couple of blocks, maybe tweak some settings, and then you're done, you know? That's how I like to work. So it's very easy to work with. And what's really great about the own-hammer player pack files is that the feature set is kind of slimmed down if you compare it to the regular own-hammer website files. This makes it very easy to get great results within seconds because the layout of those packs is just very straightforward and simple, as you'll see when you open the packs. Number three, it's a very versatile setup. Helix allows you to get any tone that you want. There are a bunch of amp models in there. If you compare it to some other amp modelers with fewer amp models, sometimes it's not as easy to get the sound you want. But in this case, everything is here, from Fender clean sounds to slightly driven Vox sounds to driven Marshalls to highly driven modern high gain amps and much more. So you will be able to find any tone that you're looking for in this platform. And that's not only from the amp modeling side, but also from the effects. There are so many stomp models and effects to choose from that it's really easy to kind of find your own sound. And that also counts for the own-hammer player pack files, of course. Right now in the marketplace, there are about 5 cabinets that you can choose from, ranging from a 1x12 deluxe Fender cabinet to a 4x12 Mesa Boogie rectifier cabinet. And each of those cabinets feature multiple speaker options. So that allows you to really find your own sound and find something that's unique to you as a musician. And that brings us to the fourth and final point, and that is uniqueness. Line 6 has some features that are very unique to the platform. There are Line 6 amp models, for example, and that's something that Line 6 has been doing for years. They basically create their own sort of digital amp models in their sort of virtual Line 6 custom shop. So that's really cool. One of the amps that I like to use very often is the Line 6 Badonk amp. And that basically is an amp that does not exist in real life, but they made it digitally in the computer. So it's a very unique sounding amp that you won't be able to find in any other platform. And the same counts for the effects again. I mean, there are so many cool and quirky effects in the Line 6 effects roster. And it's very easy to get sort of great, unique, and sort of quirky effect sounds very easily. I mean, you just load up the effect on your chain and it sounds good already. I almost never have to spend more than a minute or even less to tweak the effect blocks. So that's a really great point. Now, what I've done for this video is I've prepared 4 clips. I've prepared a clean clip, a crunch clip, a heavy rock clip, and a metal clip. I'm going to play you those clips so you can hear them, and then I'm going to demonstrate the settings. And I'm just going to show you how easy it was to achieve those tones with Helix native in my DAW, which is Cubase 10, paired with the Ownhammer IRs from the player packs. So let's take a look. So the first clip is a clean tone that I recorded with my Fender Stratocaster on the neck pickup, and it's a single coil pickup, so it has that glassy, clean sound. Let's take a listen. Yeah, so that's a very full and pristine sounding clean guitar. I really love how that sounds. Please note that I only used Helix native on these tracks. No external EQ or compression was used. The first thing I did when creating this preset was select an amp model that worked well with my guitar. I went for the US Deluxe Vibrato amp model, which is based on a classic Fender type amp, and I did not change the default settings a lot. As you can see here, the drive is set to 3.3, bass is set to 5.6, mids are set to 5.2, and treble to 5, and presence is only set to 0.4. That's all that I changed, basically. You just have to tweak the EQ a little bit until it works, and until you find a balance that works well for your guitar and your playing style. Then what I did was load up an IR block on high quality mode, and what I'm using here is the Ownhammer 1x12 DVRB speaker, which is based on a 1x12 deluxe reverb. And I'm using the mix speaker option, which is basically a blend between different speakers. So that sounds really good. And I went for the full mix type because that really complements the single coil sound of this guitar very well. Then on the beginning of the chain, I added a tube compressor from the Legacy compressors. Very simple options, just a level and a threshold control. Threshold is set to 0.57, and I raised the level a little bit just to compensate for the gain reduction. And I'm using this compressor just to even out the dynamics a little bit and to make it all sound a little bit more smooth. Then from there on, we're going into a very subtle chorus effect. I just chose the mono chorus type, and I lowered the speed a little bit to 1.6, and mix is set to 31%. So it's very subtle. You can't hear right away that there's like a very obvious chorus going on. No, I mixed it in slightly so that it just kind of brings more dimension into the sound. I really like what it did there. And then finally, at the end of the chain, I'm running a plate reverb from the Legacy reverbs as well. And I only tweaked the decay, which is set to 4.5, and the mix, which is set to 35%. That's all that I'm doing for these tones. For the right side, I basically just copied the settings. Then the next tone that I did is a crunch tone. So it's basically a mid-gain kind of classic rock sound. For this tone, I used my JTV 59 Variax from line 6 as well. It's kind of a Les Paul type guitar with humbucking pickups. Let's take a listen to a couple of sections here. And this part over here. Yeah, man, that sounds really great. I mean, the frequency response is great. It fits in the mix just perfectly. It sounds warm, but at the same time, there's a nice amount of bite going on in the sound, which are both sort of characteristics that I like to hear in a classic rock sound with humbucking pickups. Let's take a look at the settings. So I have a very simple setup going on here. Only 3 blocks. That's all you need for a really great and convincing basic rhythm tone, in my opinion. I'm starting off the chain here with the Friedman BE100 simulation, which is called the Placater Dirty, if I'm correct. Could also be Placitor, I'm not sure. Someone commented in the comments section recently that I did not pronounce it correctly, so it's either Placater or Placitor, I'm not sure. Whatever it is, it sounds amazing. And these are the settings that I'm using. Drive is set to 2.4, bass is set to 4.4, mids are set to 5.5, treble is set to 5.6, so just a kind of balanced frequency spectrum with a little bit less bass. Presence is set to 5.5, master is set to 4.6, and what I did is enable the C45 switch, and I turned off the fat switch right here. And of course, the HPE mode is on for a little bit of extra kick. For the cab block, or the impulse response block, I should say, I'm using the Ownhammer 4x12 Fman, which is based on a 4x12 Friedman cabinet. It's really nice. It's one of my favorites for a classic rock sound. And I'm using the M93 speaker option, which is based on a greenback. And for this one, I'm using the FWD, or forward mix. This really helps to bring the guitars a bit more forward than the other mixes, and it helps to make them pop out of the mix. And then we're ending the chain with a room reverb from the Legacy reverbs as well. I like to use this for all my basic rhythm tones. Decay has been set to 4.5, and the mix is set to 37%. Let's also take a quick listen to these guitars soloed. So yeah, I really love the texture and the sort of grit that this amp model has. Really nice, really cool. Then let's move on to the modern rock tones. Let's start off by just taking a listen. Great big modern open sound, like really huge wall of sound going on there. Reminds me a lot of sort of late 90s and early 2000s guitar tones. Kind of inspired by the Mesa Boogie rectifier tone, but surprisingly we're using a different amp model, which we'll get to in a second. So let's open up Helix Native. Again, very simple chain, only 4 blocks. So we're starting off the chain with the German Übersonic amp model, which is an amp that I have not used in the past at all. It's based on a Bogner Überschall amp, and I do not gel with those amp models very often, in other modeling platforms that is. But in this case, it worked out really well. So the settings are, the drive is set to 6.9, bass is set to 5.2, mids are set to 5.7, treble is turned down to 4.2. This is a very powerful control in this amp model. You'll notice that when you turn the treble up, it sounds drastically different, so give that a go. Presence is set to 5, master volume to 5.1, and I think that's all that I did there. It sounds nice, huge, and chunky. Then the IR block again, and for this tone, I went for the Ownhammer 4x12 Recto cabinet, which is based on a Mesa Boogie 4x12 rectifier cabinet. And I went for the V70 speaker option, which is basically a warmer sounding V30 or Vintage 30 by Celestion. This one has a very nice tonal characteristic, so be sure to check that out. And I went for the FWD mix again. I have some low cut and high cut settings going on here, nothing too drastic. Then we are going to the EQ block, and I only used this to notch out a little bit of mid frequencies here. The mid frequency is set to 380 Hz. That's just because there was a slight amount of sort of honkiness going on there because of the amp model, and I turned that frequency down about minus 1.6 decibels. And finally, again, the room reverb from the Legacy reverbs. Decay is set to 3.7 and mix is set to 36%. Very simple. Let's take one more listen, but this time to the guitars in solo. Yeah, sounds great. Love it. And now let's move on to the final clip, which is the heavy metal clip. It's probably my favorite thing to do when it comes to guitars. So I had a lot of fun making this one, and it went by very quickly because these tones were conjured in just a couple of minutes. Let's take a listen. Yeah, that sounds huge. It sounds gnarly. It sounds heavy. There are chunky lows. The top end is nice. The mids are nice and crunchy and very present sounding. Sounds very aggressive, which is great for metal, of course. Just loving the crap out of these tones. Let's take a look at Helix Native again. Super simple setup. Just 3 blocks again. Starting off the chain with the Line 6 Bedonk amp model. And if you've watched my other videos, you've probably seen that I like to use this amp model for metal a lot because it just sounds crushing. Do not overlook this amp model, seriously. And these are the settings that I used. Drive is set to 6.3, bass is set to 4.5, mids and treble are both set to 5, and I raised the presence quite a bit to make it sound a bit more clear and open. So that is set to 7.2. I did lower the depth all the way to 0.0 because if you add some depth in the low end can get quite boomy and sometimes a bit too big sounding. In this case, a setting of 0 just worked out perfectly. Then for the IR block, I used the Ownhammer 412 Recto again, so the Mesa Boogie rectifier cabinet. This time I went with the Tex speaker option. And it sounds really nice for heavy tones because it has a very cool roaring and big quality to it, if that makes sense. So the mids are really nice. And I used the FWD speaker mix again, just because it works well for me. Low cut is set to 100 Hertz, and that's all what I'm doing there. And then finally the reverb block again, for which I used the Room Legacy Reverb again. This time with the decay setting of 3.3 and a mix setting of 33%. So yeah, I think that all 4 of these tones sound really great. They sound really convincing and they just sound very pleasing to the ear. I would use these tones on a record for sure. I mean, I love how this sounds. And it was so easy to get these results. As you can see, most of these presets only have 3 or 4 blocks going on. So really simple setups, really amazing sounds, great IRs from Ownhammer. What else do you want? So thanks a lot for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell next to it to stay up to date. And you can also follow Sonic Drive Studio at facebook.com/Sonic Drive Studio. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.